Hi, I'm Rob,
Hi, I'm Josh.
and this is the Football Unspoken podcast where we talk about the football topics that the mainstream media do not. So, Josh, I've got an interesting one for you today. But I'm going to start off with an opening question. I've actually got two questions for you, so you got to be prepared here. But
How done have I been?
so first one is going to be who do you know the youngest player to play in the Premier League, and do you know his age? You won't be forced into giving the days, but I'm going to ask for the age and years.
15 years and something days. I'm pretty certain. Who that is, um, this can be so horrible if I'm so wrong here. I feel like Arsenal put on a player the one time who was 15, Ethan something. Am I anywhere near, or am I just so far?
You're almost bang on there, because I was gonna have a swing at you if you got it wrong, because he is an Arsenal player. It's Ethan
Okay.
Nwaneri. He
Yeah,
was
yeah. I still
15
remember his
years
last
old.
name, but
15 years old and 181 days, the youngest ever Premier League player. And then just, do you have any idea who it was in the Champions League, the youngest player in the Champions League?
I have been done. Um, I'm gonna go 16 for this one instead of 15, and
Yeah.
I'm gonna carry on the Arsenal trend and say Fabregas, but I don't know if that's just wild now.
Now that's a wild swing. I appreciate the wild swing, but no, it's a Dortmund player. You were right. You were
Okay,
18 days off. It's 16 years old and 18 days, and it was Yusufa Mokoku for Borussia Dortmund.
okay,
So
okay.
those are the interesting
Don't
ones,
feel
and then
bad.
that's going to lead me into my topic for this week, and it's essentially along the lines of: do you think we'll ever see another Wayne Rooney in the Premier League? Is kind of the idea, and by that I mean, do you think that young players are more prone to failing in the Premier League than they are in other leagues?
Yeah, I think no, we won't see another Wayne Rooney, and I think generally my reason why kind of answers the second one as well is because I think there's too much at stake now in the Premier League. Just the stakes have got so high in the Premier League in the last few years with the amount of money and stuff involved that coaches don't have the time to really um, build up or train players like they used to because they need to get the results today or next week. And clubs can't afford to say, okay, we'll have a bad season this year and lose out on that revenue, Champions League, Europa. Um, and then we'll build a team in that bad season. So then next year they will be better. So my point is, I think with like a Wayne Rooney or whatever, he was in a time where Everton and Moyes could afford maybe for him to come in and not perform. Obviously he did. I'm just saying if he hadn't, I felt like they could have got away with him, let's say, underperforming, and it wouldn't have been as catastrophic as it is now. So that's my initial thought.
Okay, that's definitely interesting. I think I didn't think about the financial aspect of it. I will say, when I was thinking about this topic, I didn't really think about the financial aspect of it, and that makes a lot of sense. But at the same time, why do you think it's do you, or maybe you don't, but do you think it's easier for young players to break through in other leagues, and do you think that's because the Premier League has that hype around it, or what's your thoughts on that one?
Well, yeah, there's also the media aspect. So obviously, with the amount of media pressure on these young players, and you got to remember they're humans, like we all are at the end of the day. So I'm not sure how well you or I would have dealt at 16 years old or 17 years old, going to go play in front of 60,000 or 90,000 people, and not even just that, like the social media that's attached to that. If you look at players, like how much abuse maybe a Rashford right now is getting, a Maguire in the past, or Saka at the World Cup when he missed a penalty. You look at those kind of things, and I think it is much harder in that way for players, even than like your original example of Rooney. Again, if he'd underperformed, social media just wasn't that big of a thing back then. So he could have just carried on with his life. He would have got the biggest punishment for him is he would have got dropped from a few games. So my point is for the other leagues, I think there's less of that happening. And maybe because also if an English player goes over to the German league, he doesn't speak German. He probably doesn't even know if he's getting abuse from the media or whatever because he doesn't even understand the language. So it's getting all this abuse, doesn't even know. So I think it's much harder now from the social media, the club's finances, and such a result-driven industry. I think the combination of those factors together makes it virtually impossible. And one thing I'll just add is that this is a bonus thing because I know sort of physical specimens will come through. But the Premier League, I think a lot of people have touched on this. The Premier League has become a lot more physical in the last 5-10 years. And obviously, at 16 years old, or 16 to 18, it's close to impossible to be physically ready enough. That's what I feel to play in the league anymore, where maybe you could have got away with just being technically brilliant in the league. But now I don't think that's enough.
Yeah, no, that is quite interesting. I think the one thing I would say is I'm not sure if I 100%. I agree that it's gotten more physical, but I'm not 100% sure if I necessarily agree with like the idea that a lot of these youngsters can't handle the physicality because I look at things like if so transfer market for example I took a look when researching this like who are the most valuable under 21s and only
Yeah.
two of them are in the Premier League. It's in the top 10. Only two of the top 10 are in the Premier League, and it's like Rasmus Højlund and Romeo Lavia are the
Yeah.
two under 21s who. And the interesting thing about that was that the the interesting thing about that was that they're also probably the only two players in the top 10 who aren't on track to hit 100 senior appearances before the age of 21. So there are other players, for example, in there were Jude Bellingham, that Zaire Emery from PSG, 17-year-old,
Yeah.
um, Musiala from Bayern. So those guys have all already or are close to eclipsing 100 senior caps, and these are in top level teams. I'm talking teams that are playing Champions League before 21,
Yeah.
and you can't say that Champions League is an
Mm.
easier game than the Premier League. So I
Well, the
also
one
think
thing
there's an element of not trusting the youth, which is a weird situation.
Well, I wonder if, because like in those leagues, Bayern and PSG have such a monopoly in their leagues. I wonder how many of those players on that list you saw, how many are in Spain? Because, like I say, in Germany, Bayern and then PSG and France have a monopoly on the league. So you can kind of get away with you find an extremely talented youngster, let him play the whole league game. That obviously accelerates his
Hmm.
growth much quicker. So he can then play the Champions League as well. Like he gets to that level quickly.
So on that point, three of them were in the Spanish league. I can't remember which
Okay.
league, but I know Gavi was one of them.
Mm.
And then there was Bellingham's obviously in the Spanish league at the moment. That
Yeah.
was the one, and then Gavi was the other one for Barcelona, and then there was a second Barcelona player whose name I can't remember right now. But like Gavi for me is a fantastic example. 19 years old, playing in Barcelona, and absolutely he walked onto the field and started dominating immediately, similar to
Yeah.
Jude Bellingham. Um, but the reason I kind of ask this is because I almost feel like there's an unwillingness to play your youngsters until they're needed. And you look at a player like Lewis Miley at Newcastle, 17 years old, and he's come onto the Premier League field and he looks at home. Like he's not a
Yeah.
top 10 player. I 100% see that. Like, but he's a Premier League player at 17 years old.
Yeah.
Surely some of these teams who aren't pushing Champions League, who aren't really pushing even Europa League, can look at their youth team and go, I've probably got one or two players who can just sit on the bench at the very least.
Yeah. No, it is
Um,
interesting. It's also interesting though that this divulges into a debate about are Premier League teams doing enough to push English talent through. I think ultimately, instead of just trying to grab the next 19-year-old Brazilian from Flamingos or something like that, are they doing enough to push those young English talents through? That's a side topic, but it does kind of underpin this
Yeah,
discussion.
that's a great side topic. I kind of wish we would definitely have to address that as well. But I think to round it off, we'll go. Both of us kind of agree that we're probably never going to see another Wayne Rooney. He was A, freakishly talented, but B, grew up in a different era where financial fair play wasn't a thing. Premier League was probably a bit less physical, and there was more opportunities for youngsters. But do you think, to round us off, do you think that it's easier, or do you think it's that much harder for players in the Premier League to start off young and excel?
I do. I also find that players now are really being shoehorned into a position where before, like Steven Gerrard, when he first started playing for Liverpool, started as a right back and moved into midfield. I just don't see that happening as much. It's almost like people are, you got Odegaard. He's a 10, can't play anywhere else, doesn't matter. So if you have a 10 already, you can't buy Odegaard. And I think that doesn't give an opportunity to the younger players to come in, like Gareth Bale started left back and then end up, further forward. So things like that also don't seem to be happening, which was a gateway in for a lot of the younger players.
Yeah, that's very really interesting and some great points, especially the financial aspect, which I didn't think about. So I was interesting to get your thoughts on that, and I'd be very keen to hear what anyone else kind of thinks about this.